Have you ever thought that a suit, yes, just a suit, could shake a city? A suit, worn by young people to express their identity, became a symbol of a generational war in a matter of days. This is Los Angeles in 1943, i.e., a city that seemed to be safe from the shadow of war, but was actually seething from within. Zoot Suit Riots. The name still resonates in American history today. For some, it's a fashion story. For others, a symbol of a generational war. But really, it's a story of power, identity, and hate. So let's turn back the wheels of time and walk back to the time when a suit held up a mirror to America. Yes, this is a story that begins with a suit and ends with a test of humanity. Because sometimes clothes don't just cover the body, they also expose ideologies. Los Angeles in the 1940s, a city of dreams, a sea of lights, and a home of contrasts. This was the era when World War II was in full swing. Factories were running day and night, soldiers were going to the front lines, and women were stepping into factories for the first time. But beneath that glamour was another story. A story that began with people who wanted to be called Americans, but were suffering the penalty of being Mexicans. Their language was different, their dreams were different, and their clothes? That was all that became the problem. The Zoot Suit, a long, shiny, wide-legged suit that became the hallmark of Mexican-American youth in the 1940s. It wasn't just clothing, it was a declaration. We are too, and we are different. But this declaration didn't sit well with the houses of power. Wearing a Zoot Suit was more of a resistance than a fashion statement. The suit was large, conspicuous, and deliberately big, as if to say, we didn't come to hide. These young men were called pachucos, a word that oozed pride, audacity, and danger. Their hair was slicked back, their leather boots gleamed, and the music? Swing and jazz, which echoed through the streets. Their culture was alive, but unusual for white society. The newspapers called them gangsters. The police called them troublemakers. But they called themselves living people. The Zoot Suit was a symbol, and symbols are always dangerous. World War II had united America, but it had also created a new divide. As each soldier chanted national unity, the line between us and them was deepening on the streets of Los Angeles. American soldiers, especially Navy SEALs, often came to the city and considered these pachucos unpatriotic. But would you believe that simply wearing a Zoot Suit was considered treasonous? In wartime, the idea was that when the country was under clothing rationing, their youth was anti-national for them to waste so much clothing. But the truth? The anger wasn't against the clothes, it was against the people. It was against color, race, and identity. And this volcano was about to erupt. The media did the oil work. The newspapers ran headlines like, Zoot Suit gangs terrorized the city. Police reports were exaggerated. Every crime, every altercation, no matter how trivial, was blamed on the pachucos. A picture was formed in people's minds. Zoot Suit wearer are criminal. This was the moment when clothing, from identity to crime, became a crime. There was no TV in those days, but the sounds of the radio were spreading like burning sparks. Newspapers sold fear, and fear created hatred. Hatred spilled blood on the streets. A fashion had now become a crime, and this crime had not yet reached its peak. Date, June 3rd, 1943. Location, downtown Los Angeles. In the darkness of the night, a fight broke out. Small, but with devastating results. Some Navy men, some pachucos, insults, shoves, and then punches. The next day, the newspapers began to scream, "Servicemen beaten by Zoot Suit gang!" That was the spark that ignited the fire. Dozens of soldiers came out across the city. They were in cars, batons, and belts in hand. And their goal? To target every young man who wore a Zoot Suit. The city had now become a battlefield. But this war was not against the enemy, but against its own citizens. The streets of the city were now filled with screams. Soldiers were running everywhere, dragging and beating the young men in the Zoot Suit, tearing their clothes off. And the people? They were watching the spectacle. Some were even clapping. Some policemen stood at a distance, smiling, as if it were all okay. This was the moment when justice closed its eyes. A suit became a crime, and humanity a silent bystander. Los Angeles was no longer just a city. It had become a symbol of a system of hate. What did the police do? Nothing. Or rather, everything went wrong. Dozens of pachucos were arrested during the riots, but none of the soldiers. What kind of justice was this? The pictures of the arrested youths were printed in the newspapers, and they became even more criminals. Without any trial, some officials were even talking about banning the jumpsuit. That is, crime had now become a garment. The government remained silent. The media was happy, and the oppressed, just silent, but with a storm in their hearts. Then a voice arose from Washington, Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the president. She openly condemned the riots. She said, "This is a sign of racial hatred, not the rule of law." Her statement caused a stir throughout the country. Some praised her. Some said she was spreading misconceptions. But the truth was, for the first time, a great man had spoken the truth. Her words proved it. It turned out that the issue wasn't just about clothes. It was about justice. It was about equality. And when someone powerful speaks the truth has to be heard. It was a turning point. But the story wasn't over yet. The media split in two after Eleanor's statement. Some supported her point, while others called her enemies of the nation. Local Los Angeles, newspapers continued to portray the pachucos as dangerous gangsters. The general public was confused. Were they really traitors or oppressed? But one thing was clear. Public opinion was beginning to change. People began to wonder if we had made the wrong people enemies. The question grew, and for the first time, the silence began began to break. People began to realize that perhaps the Zoot Suit wasn't just a suit, it was a cry. The Zoot Suit was no longer just a fashion statement. It had become a protest, an identity. When a young man wore it, he was actually saying, I am, whether you believe it or not. That was the real power. The suit was a visual resistance against the powerful. There was pride in every thread, rebellion in every color. It was not fashion, it was a declaration of existence. And that was what scared the powerful the most. Because when someone started to be proud of their existence, then the system of slavery began to shake. The Zoot Suit had become a flag of the wounds of a nation, of the pride of an identity. The fire in Los Angeles did not stop. It was spreading. The news reached Long Beach, Watts, and even San Diego. Soldiers and ordinary people now began to consider themselves laws when they saw the Zoot Suit, stopping young people on the streets, tearing their clothes. It had now become entertainment. The newspapers called it cleaning the streets. How ironic. Cleanliness, but whose? Not humanity, but identity. Every day, dozens of young people were harassed. Some killed, some missing, and the police still silent. This silence was the biggest accomplice. The incident left a deep scar on the Mexican-American community. Many families would forbid their children from wearing the suit, saying, life is in danger, son, not fashion. The mothers were scared. The fathers were disappointed. And the young people, angry. They felt that their city was no longer theirs. They were pushed away, not just by the streets, but by their identity. But this pain became a new fire within them. This fire became the foundation of the Chicano movement in the decades to come. And this was the moment when the wound took the form of a revolution. Even after the riots, the suit culture did not die. It went underground, but it survived. In music, in art, in theater, the stories of the Pachucos took on new forms. This was the time when the cultural revolt was born. People said, if you want to erase us, we will live by our art. The Zoot Suit later became a symbol. Chicano pride. The suit became no longer a symbol of shame, but of glory. And that is the mood of history. What is a crime today becomes a pride tomorrow. And now, the Los Angeles of 1943 is left behind. But the question remains, have we really moved on? Have we learned that suppressing identity only breeds hatred? The Zoot Suit riots may be over, but their echoes can still be heard in the streets today. Whenever someone is shamed for their dress, their language, or their culture, history quietly reminds us, it has all happened before. So the next time you see someone different, remember? Difference is not always dangerous. Sometimes, it's that difference that changes the world, and it's that difference that makes the person pause. Next, in part 2, we'll talk about the history behind the Zoot Suit riots, the political implications, and the lessons learned. The city was indeed quiet after the riots, but that silence was like the ocean breathing after a storm. There were no more screams in the streets, but the fear remained. The police released the figures. Dozens arrested, dozens injured, no major damage. But the damage is not what is seen. The damage is what is felt in the heart. When a generation feels alienated from its own country, many young people left the city. Some burned their Zoot Suits, and some in defiance wore more flashy clothes. Because sometimes resistance is survival. What did the government do? Nothing much. In Washington, the incident was considered just a local problem. A few reports were made, a few statements were made, and then it was all filed away. President Roosevelt never commented directly on it. Why? Perhaps because the war was on, and they didn't want America's internal racial problems to be exposed to the world. But the truth is, silence is also a stance. And that silence set the debate on racial justice back decades. This was a time when power overcame politics over conscience. The Mexican-American community was indeed broken, but not shattered. They carved stories from their wounds. The parents of these young men said, our children were defamed, but history will remember that they were the victims, not the criminals. And indeed, that is what happened. In the years to come, this event became the seed of a new political and social awakening. Chicano identity was now becoming a matter of pride. The Zoot Suit was no longer a crime, but a metaphor for protest. This was the moment when the victim turned his wound into a slogan. Time passed, and the language of the media began to change. Some journalists admitted for the first time that the Zoot Suit riots were actually race riots, not gang fights. This was a significant change. Because words make history, and when words are mixed with justice, the truth emerges. Some local newspapers published interviews with the affected youth, where they spoke about their pain, their fear, and their identity. These stories sank into the hearts of people. Gradually, the Zoot Suit riots became not just an event, but a question. Do we really believe in equality? Interestingly, Hollywood remained silent at that time. Perhaps because in the era of nationalism, no one wanted to go against the war atmosphere. But in the 1970s, when the Chicano movement reached its peak, films began to be made. The Zoot Suit began to take on a new life in theater, art, and music. In 1978, the famous play Zoot Suit was released, which reminded the whole of America that this event could never be forgotten. This was the power of art, which keeps the truth alive even after time. Hollywood finally spoke out, but the truth had long since burned out. Historians later looked at the event from a new perspective. Some said it was an explosion of racial hatred, some said class struggle, and some said it It was a mirror of the American conscience. Research found that most of the accusations against the Pachucos were false or exaggerated. That is, the justice system admitted failure. But this admission did not come quickly. It came decades later. And that is the tragedy of history, that the truth often comes too late. But it does come. The Zoot Suit Riots are no longer just a book. They have become moral lessons. If we can learn anything from this incident, it is that appearance is not always truth. A dress cannot be a crime, a language cannot be a crime, and a culture cannot be a threat to anyone. The Zoot Suit Riots teach us that when a society becomes based on fear, it loses its justice. They remind us that the suppression of identity always creates a reaction, and that reaction, if not understood in time, turns into riots. This lesson is as true today as it was in 1943. Many young people later told their stories. Someone said, "I just went dancing and I became an enemy." Someone said, "My only crime was that I stood out." These voices were small but true. They showed the world that the people who were called criminals were actually oppressed. These stories were later adapted into books, poetry, and songs. Pachuco was no longer a slur. It became a character who stood up for what was right, even when the entire system was against him. These are the human stories that keep history alive. When the Chicano movement began in the 1960s and 70s, the Zoot Suit Riots were called the initial spark. Students, activists, and artists all made it part of their movement. They said, "We are the ones you suppressed in 1943, and now we are taking back our language, our pride, and our history." The movement gave Mexican-American identity a new place in educational institutions, the media, and politics. The Zoot Suit became a symbol of cultural awakening. The suit that was once a crime now became a garment of freedom. It was the revenge of the times, but in a peaceful and conscious way. If we look at America today, we see the same old shadows. Police brutality, discrimination, and the war on identity. Everything seems new but is old. The Zoot Suit Riots remind us that when society makes the other the enemy, humanity loses. Today, when a young person is proud of his identity, he is actually the heir of those Pachucos. That story is not over yet. Only the clothes have changed. The place has changed, but the wounds, still fresh. History never really ends. It just changes form. In many schools in America, the Zoot Suit Riots are now taught as a case study. It is not just a historical event, it is a moral lesson. Students learn how the media and politics can turn a small misunderstanding into a national riot. Teachers say, if we do not learn from the past, the future will punish us. This lesson is for every country today, where discrimination on the basis of identity is rampant. The Zoot Suit Riots are no longer a book, a warning, a mirror. Art never died for the Zoot Suit Riots. Murals on walls, Chicano music lyrics, and theater dialogues. The same spirit lives on in all of them. These stories are not just of the past, but of all those who were considered other. Art turned wounds into songs. That is the beauty of humanity, that it turns even sorrow into a song. Zoot Suits are no longer history. It has become a culture that says, we were, we are, and we will be. The Zoot Suit Riots are not just a chapter in American history. They are lessons for every society in the world where discrimination lives on. Whether based on color, language, or religion, hatred always takes the same form. This incident shows that the powerful do not always write the story. Sometimes the oppressed also take up the pen, and when they write, it is not words but revolution that is born. This story teaches us that identity is not a threat, but the beauty of diversity, and this lesson is eternal for humanity. Have you ever wondered, if you were back then, what would you have worn? A zoot suit or silence? This story is not just about the Pachucos, it is about all of us. Everyone who has ever been ridiculed for being different is part of this history. The Zoot Suit Riots force us to look inside ourselves. Do we really know how to accept others? Or do we still judge by one suit? This question is still the same today, and perhaps always will be. This is the real power of the Zoot Suit Riots, that they still hold up a mirror to us today. And finally, this story tells us that freedom is not just about the law, it is about understanding. The Zoot Suit Riots is not a story about a dress, it is a story about a test of humanity. This was a moment when justice was weak, but truth did not give up. Today, when you see someone different, remember, they are probably wearing their Zoot Suit, and there is a whole history behind that suit. Hate is easy, but hard to understand. Let's try to understand. If you were touched by this story, take a moment to think, do we really want to live in a world where fashion becomes a crime? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments.